Dad and I thought it was important that the kids learn to love the gospel the way we loved it. And so we made a point to take the family to general conferences and stay in the as inexpensive a motel as we could find close to Temple Square. And you couldn't get tickets then. You had to get up and stand in line. So we would be a block from Temple Square, and we would get up and be in line at 6 o'clock or 6:30, some horribly early time with all of our family, and stand in line, and we always got in to the tabernacle. That's where they had the general conferences then. And so the kids had the experience growing up of going to Salt Lake and attending conference, which I think was a testimony builder in itself for them to have those kinds of experiences.
Those were primarily the April conferences that we would go to.
I think they were the April conferences because Dad was always involved in football in those days in the fall. And it was wonderful to go there in the spring, take your family and go and enjoy conference together. So those are some of our happy memories. We took vacations often, but almost without fail, the vacations were back to Idaho to see grandmas and grandpas and a few old friends along the way that we wanted to keep in touch with. And so the kids had a lot of involvement with their grandparents and other relatives, even though we lived clear out in California, very separated from our family. But we saw that they had a lot of interactions. So, and we went sometimes in the summer, sometimes we went home for Christmas. And I remember one Christmas we went, and in Soda Springs, Grandpa knew some relative that had skidoos, snowmobiles, and we went up one of the local mountains just out of Soda Springs. Do you remember that? And we all went skidooing, and our little ones were little, but Reed and Karen were a good age to really enjoy that. And Reed was able to go duck hunting with his dad and fishing with his grandpa. I remember one time we went on a vacation, and I don't remember which children were involved, because over the years we did it with the older ones and then we did it with the younger ones. But we didn't know if we were going to have a chance to really go out and go fishing, so we went to the dam. There was a big dam at Soda Springs, or just close to Soda Springs.
Just west.
Pardon?
Just west of Soda.
Just west of Soda, Reed says. And we let the kids get out their fishing poles and catch carp. And we had the audacity for them to bring their carp home to Grandma and Grandpa Gunnell's. And I didn't think Grandpa was going to let us onto his property, because that was, you didn't ever lower yourself to catch carp. Now, today, and for years, carp is a delicacy in some of the Asian countries. So it wasn't as bad as it sounds, but to Grandpa, he couldn't dig a hole fast enough and bury those carp to get them out of his sight. But we had lots of fun experiences. Grandma and Grandpa, early on, when Reed and Karen were young, purchased a little fourplex in Soda Springs with our help. Dad and I helped them with money for the down payment, and we were college students and marrieds. But we were so anxious for them to have some security, something for when they grew older to sustain themselves. And so they bought this fourplex. And somewhere around that time, I don't remember whether they were in Soda Springs or still in Conda, but Grandpa was a miner, and it was underground mining for phosphate out at Conda. And they had a cave-in when he was down at work, and the fellow that he was working with was killed. and Grandpa was buried up to his shoulders in all the rubble and had to stay there until he could be dug out. So I'm sure it was a very, very terrifying experience for him, and he never went back into the mines. And so he just retired early. They closed down the mines in time at Conda, and the miners all moved to somewhere in Montana. But Grandpa just stayed and found things to do, bought a little Volkswagen, and he would go out and go fishing, and he discovered that he could make a little pin money if he had little sticks that were electrical sticks that you could stick down in the ground, and the night crawlers didn't like the electricity and they would come up on top of the grass. He had a lot of night crawlers in his grass at this little fourplex that they owned, and we would go sometimes and help him catch night crawlers at night so that he could go down by some service station or someplace where fishermen would stop to get ice or whatever, and Grandpa would sell his night crawlers to the fishermen that were on their way fishing. Grandpa was a fun grandpa. We loved Grandpa, didn't we,
Yeah.
Reed? We loved all of our grandparents. And Mother married Grandpa George when Karen was 8 years old, so Reed would have been 10. And the reason I remember that is Grandpa had twin boys that were also 8 years old. And Mother said she fell in love with those boys before she fell in love with George. But she remarried, and so then we had that's when she became a Grandma Davy instead of a Grandma Hargrave. And we learned to love Grandpa Davy. He was quite a teaser, and he teased a little mean streak, I think, in the tease would be the honest way to describe it. And our younger kids were kind of afraid of him because one time he put David's shoes in the deep freeze and wouldn't tell him where they were. And it was his version of how to play with the kids, and it was not always what I would have chosen, but we learned to love him, and he was a great addition, made life a lot happier for Mother. It was after Mother married Grandpa Davy and that was close to the time that we became active. Dad and I and our family really converted to the gospel, and we went home. And Mother doesn't give us full credit because she went to classes in Manan, but she listened to the lessons, and we came home in the summertime, and Dad baptized Grandma Davy into the church. And she was like Reed. Once she knew it, and she knew it was true, she gave her heart to it. And taught, even though she was older, she'd always worked. She taught Sunday school. She taught the kids that were seniors in high school. She taught in Cub Scouting and had the little Cub Scout boys. She taught in junior Sunday school. She taught the little kids. She was very beloved, and wherever they called on her to serve. I know that's a diversion from what I'm supposed to be talking about, but when I think of our vacations, then I think of them, and it makes me remember my mama. What a great, great woman she was, and how she loved the kids. She loved Reed and Karen with a passion. For years and years, they were her only grandchildren, obviously, and she doted on them like no other grandmother could have doted on her grandchildren, and they were very, very special to her as they grew up. And no less for Julie and David and Sherry when they had their turn. But those first ones are always very memorable. And so part of our growing up years after we moved to California were our vacations home to see the grandparents. Okay, going to get me back on course?
What other vacations do you remember? You know, in the early, let's keep it pre-BYU if we can. Just for some, at least for a starting point.
Well, one year we went to Yellowstone Park when you kids were growing up, and that was a great experience. We took Bobby Larkin with us because the Larkins had moved back to Idaho, and we had a great time at Yellowstone Park. Once we took a vacation. That was when you went on your mission, I think, so you missed that with us. But Grandma and Grandpa Gunnell had a little travel trailer, and we borrowed that, and we had Karen and our 3 little ones, and we took a trip up through West Yellowstone with a trailer, so we could stay in the trailer. The ones we went with you, we were out with the bears. We were camping in a tent when the bears came down, and I got so scared I wanted everybody in the car. And Dad, the bears weren't as mean as they got to be later on years, because we had bears come right down into the camp, and we'd just honk the horn and scare them away and make sure our food was in the car or someplace where the bears couldn't rummage around and find our coolers and get our food. That's really why they came into the camps. But we went fishing out on Yellowstone Lake in boats and saw all the sights of Yellowstone Park. So that was one I remember. We didn't take very many vacations that weren't just to see Grandma and Grandpa. Can you think of any others?
Tell us about Ensenada.
Oh, Ensenada. One of the things we loved about Southern California is that we were close to the Mexican border. And one of our favorite things to do was to take our family down, not to Ensenada initially, but to Tijuana. And we would go down, and what you did at Tijuana was just go shopping in the shops and try to talk the Mexican merchants down to a low price. And they knew what the Americans were doing, so I'm sure they started the prices up here, knowing they were going to sell down here. But it was a great fun. We took Reed and his cousin Rick McCullough came as a graduation present. As a senior in high school, he came to California. And we took him to Tijuana. And he and Reed wanted to go in business. They had this grand plan that after their missions, they were going to come to Tijuana and buy all this junk stuff and take it back and sell it and form a little business selling stuff. They never did anything more than talk about it, but they had a fun, a fun time talking about Tijuana, and it was always so much fun to go shopping and come back with your treasures. And then Dad got involved on the Cal State campus with the Peace Corps. Our campus was his campus was one of the places where they trained volunteers, college kids, to join the Peace Corps and be trained to go to different countries to do what the Peace Corps did, to go and help the people of whatever the country they were sent to. And so Dad was very involved with that, and he and another faculty member, Bud Wise, as I recall, the two of them were both working in the Peace Corps, and they had planned to take the Peace Corps students, the ones who were training, down to Mexico and give them the experience of living among the Mexican people to prepare them for where they would be sent when they were actually sent out as Peace Corps volunteers. And so they determined they would go to Ensenada. It wasn't quite the same as going to Tijuana, was just a border town. And it always had as many tourists almost as they did people that lived there. But Ensenada was a little further down into Mexico. And so Dad decided he was going, and he and Bud decided they would take their families with them and make it a vacation for the families while they were busy working with these Peace Corps students. And so we drove down, and Dad, when he had gone to Mexico City with the football coach team over the years, had gotten the, I don't know what you call it, but there was a bug that just attacked your whole system. And sometimes he'd be sick for 2 or 3 months after he got back from a football trip before he could get that out of his system. And so he didn't trust the food. We borrowed the big milk cans, the 5-gallon milk cans from a place in El Monte, and we loaded those milk cans up with water. We took our own water. You didn't buy bottled water in those days like you do now, but we filled those milk cans up with water, and we bought pop, and we just literally took everything, just about everything that we would need to eat. And I can recall we stayed there for a week. David was a baby, and we didn't think we wanted to take him, so Arlene Smith kept David. And Julie was about a 3-year-old. We took her, and she made friends with a little 3-year-old daughter of the maid, the Mexican maid that came in every day to clean our, we lived in little cabins, individual cabins right on the beach. And so she would come into our cabin and wash the dishes and make the beds and clean the floors, just like you were doing if you were in a motel and the people came. But the Wises had a cabin, and we had a cabin, and the students were all out living with Mexican families. But the Wises had a daughter that was Karen's age, so we thought, okay, Karen's got somebody that she can chum with. But they didn't have a son that was Reed's age, and Reed was about 14 years old. And so we let Reed choose somebody he would like to take with him, and he invited Robert McEwen, one of his best buddies in the ward, and Robert made the trip with us, and it was fun. The boys and the men went out deep sea fishing and had that great experience, and you brought the catch back in, and the Mexican men were there that would fillet the fish, and if we got more than we wanted, we would, or a fish that we didn't like as well. They didn't catch any huge ones. They caught bonita and yellowtail, which was a type of tuna. But we would give the ones we didn't want. We didn't want the bonita, and so we would give that to our Mexican, our little lady that was our maid. And she was so appreciative, because a lot of those people lived in cardboard boxes. They were very poor. And then we had a big fish fry, and we would eat the fish. That was about the only thing we would eat of Mexican origin. And so we had a big fish fry and ate this yellowtail and loved it. And just did fun things on the beach. And we would go into Ensenada and enjoy shopping and buying things. We rented horses, and the kids got to go horseback riding along the beaches. They could go out and play in the water. It was, to me, it was a glorious vacation for our family. And Reed and Robert did a naughty thing. That, can I tell this for posterity?
You're talking.
They knew that it was illegal. Fireworks were illegal in California, and they were probably semi-illegal in Mexico, but they sold them under the counter. And so they waited their opportunity and they walked. We weren't far from the shopping center. When Dad and Mom, the adults were all involved in something, Robert and Reed on their own, they walked into Ensenada and they bought fireworks. I don't know how much Robert bought, but Reed bought a lot. He had been planning on this. And they came back and hid them in the rock somewhere until they had an opportunity. And then they went to we had a Chevrolet sedan, and they got in the back seat of that Chevrolet and raised the seat up and hid those fireworks under the seat. So here we are when we are going home from Ensenada at the border, and the border guard is saying, do you have this or this or this in your car? Did you buy this? And we'd say no. And one of them, did you buy any fireworks? And we said, oh no. And Reed and Robert were sitting in the back seat of the car, and they knew that they were sitting on illegal fireworks. So we came home, and Reed didn't know what to do with his when he got him home, but he found a metal box, kind of the way that you'd keep fishing tackle in. I think it was probably a box that had been designed for fishing tackle. And he took all those fireworks and put them in this metal box so that they wouldn't get wet and get ruined. Then he went back in the ivy of our backyard, and the ivy was so thick, it was easy. He separated the ivy, dug a hole big enough, and planted these fireworks, then covered with dirt, and the ivy went back over, and we had no idea that they were there. But we had little neighborhood boys that liked to peek over and through the fence to see what was with Gunnell's house. They were younger boys, and we started getting a parent or two on our street on Louise Avenue, which was a long cul-de-sac, that their little kids, they had looked and had seen Reed get into these fireworks, and they were curious enough that they sneaked into our yard, went and unearthed what they found and stole a few of the fireworks, just so that Reed wouldn't realize that any were missing. And so we got a report or two from mothers down the street that we didn't even know very well, that their kids were getting fireworks from our backyard. And we said, that can't be true. We don't have any. But I said, I'll look and see. So I went out looking, and I found the stash of fireworks. So when Reed got confronted by his mother and his father, that could they explain where these fireworks came from that were suddenly hidden in our backyard, and Reed couldn't bring himself. I have to tell you, Reed was a model son. He truly was a model son. The sun raised and set on him because we knew he was such a good boy. But you always have to have some little flaw in your character that becomes a growing experience. And he couldn't bring himself to confess that they were his. And so he blamed it on a non-member friend of his from the high school or junior high school. You were probably in junior high then. Oh, yeah. Larry Watkins. And he said, well, they belonged to my friend, and I was hiding. He didn't dare take them home, let his parents see him, so I was hiding them in our yard for him. And Dad said, okay, we need to go and talk to Larry and his father. Reed hadn't planned on that. He thought he had gotten out of it pretty slick. And so he hurried and got hold of Larry Watkins and told him the turn things had taken. And Larry agreed to take the heat for Reed. And so the two Reeds, father and son, got as far as coming up the sidewalk, approaching Larry's house, and Reed Wayne his conscience got the best of him. He could have pulled it off. Larry was willing to, but he said, "Dad, we can't go in. You and I have to talk." And he confessed to what he'd done. And we were not parents that punished our kids with grounding. That was the big thing when they were teachers, or were teenagers. If you did something that the parents didn't like, you got grounded, which means you had to stay home. You couldn't go to whatever things were available, school activities or church activities or what, over the period that the parents grounded you. And we had good kids, I'll grant you, but we didn't really believe in grounding. And this was our first experience with one of our children doing something that was really wrong. And so I left it up to Dad. He was a priesthood holder. And he said, he talked with Reed and he said, "I think Reed has punished himself enough for what he has done." And there was no punishment at all except Dad took possession of the fireworks. And then in time, he would bring the fireworks out and Reed would shoot them off. And Dad had built a little playhouse for Julie that was on our patio in the backyard, a playhouse, and it was made of wood, veneer or whatever, and it had a little roof on it and shingles. And Reed shot off a firecracker from the corner of that playhouse that was strong enough, it blew the corner of the roof, the little corner where the fireworks was residing. But he and his dad had a lot of fun until those fireworks were all gone, because we knew Reed had repented. That's the only thing I can really think of that Reed ever did that wasn't straight arrow all his growing up years. So his one indiscretion was not worthy of our coming down hard on him, because he had learned through his own feelings and the guilt he felt and the remorse he felt when all was said and done for what he had done. And so that's one story we like to tell on Reed that shows he was a boy after all, and that he had understanding parents.
You referenced earlier the trip up to Oregon, to Grants Pass.
Oh, I forgot, that was another trip. See, thank you for reminding me. When Julie was little and I was pregnant with David, Grandma Davy had joined the church, and through her influence, Aunt Ted, who lived in Grants Pass, Oregon, had joined the church. And we were so happy to have more of our family join the church that we decided we would take a trip. And that was one of the motivations to go up and see Aunt Ted. So we left Arcadia and we went first to the Sacramento area, and that was for Aunt Verla, the sister. Aunt Verla was just younger than Mother, and Aunt Ted was just younger than Aunt Verla. So they were sisters that had grown up with Grandma Davy. And Aunt Ted was widowed. Her husband, Uncle Jim, had been in the Navy and retired and then died of a heart attack. And they had one adopted child, Jimmy, that they'd adopted as a baby. And so it was Aunt Ted and Jimmy and Uncle George, different from Grandpa George, but a friend that Uncle Jim had brought home from the Navy, who was kind of a lost soul. He had family in the Carolinas or somewhere in the South, but he didn't have any place to really call home. And Uncle Jim had told him in the Navy, "When we get out of the Navy, you will always have a home with me." And he brought him home to live in Grants Pass, and then he died. And Aunt Ted, even though a lot of eyebrows were probably raised at that time, because it was an unrelated man that lived with her and with her little boy after her husband died, but he was just a good friend, and it was so good to have him be kind of a substitute father for Jim as he was growing up. And Uncle George, as we called him, never joined the church, but he was so faithful to Aunt Ted and to Jimmy. They were his family. And Aunt Ted died first, and Jim and his wife Donna then looked after Uncle George and loved him as though he were a member of the family until he died. So it was a unique situation, but Aunt Ted knew that she was honest and she was worthy of a temple recommend and whatever. And if anybody wanted to gossip, which I don't know whether they did or not, because it was an unusual circumstance, but she never ever let it bother her. But we went up and visited Aunt Ted, and she lived on a ranch, and she had a cornfield, and the deer would come in and eat from the cornfield, and the little rabbits would come through the yard, and wild blackberries grew there. And she would get up early in the morning while we stayed, what few days we stayed with them, and we awoke to some delicacy that she had baked up with blackberries. And we thought we had died and gone to heaven. She treated us so royally, and she was so thrilled to have us come and stay with her. And then from Aunt Ted's, we went on up through the redwoods, or maybe we got to the redwoods before we got to Aunt Ted's. I guess we did, because the redwoods were in California. But we went through the redwoods and up to Grants Pass and up as far as Crater Lake. We had a lovely, different kind of vacation. In the redwoods, we went through trees. You could drive your car through the trees, and they had a big statue of Paul Bunyan and his blue ox. And do you remember about that, Reed? It was just a beautiful trip, and we, as I recall, we drove the coast route going home. We drove down the California coast, that highway that bordered the ocean, and it was a beautiful trip home. So that was memorable. Thank you for reminding me. And of course, unfortunately for Reed, we always wanted to go back east, take our family back east.
Don't go there yet.
Don't go there yet, okay.
We'll get to that. Talk about Hawaii.
Oh, yes. See, it's a good thing I have a son to remind me of these things. When Dad was coaching at Cal State LA, they really didn't have, it was a state university. It wasn't like UCLA and SC. That was University of California. We were the state university system. But they didn't have money for scholarships, really, for football players. So they lured what quality football players they could get to play at Cal State by promising them 2 trips, a big trip every year. One year they would go to Mexico City to play Mexico City, and Hawaii would come to Cal State, and they would reverse it the next year. Then the football team would go play the University of Hawaii in Hawaii, and Mexico City would come and play in California. And so one year when Sherry was a baby, Dad had always wanted to take me to Hawaii, and so that was the year that he decided that that was my year to go to Hawaii. And so Reed and Karen were still in high school, and we left Reed and Karen home alone, Reed in charge, and Karen went to her first formal dance when she wasn't quite 16. It was a girl's choice, but she and Mary Dahlquist went together, and we gave her permission to go just when she wasn't quite old enough to follow church guidelines. But it was a girl's choice, and they asked 2 boys from the Pasadena wards and went to a dance. But Reed was in charge of staying home with Karen, And Sherry stayed with Julene Hampton. She was just, I think, 5 months or something. She was quite little. And I think maybe David and Julie stayed together with the Luces. But we left all of our kids at home. And Dad and I went and invited Grandma and Grandpa Gunnell to go with us. And it was their 46th wedding anniversary while we were in Hawaii. And that was so much fun to take them. They were so appreciative. And Grandpa was such a good sport. And he wasn't really carefree, happy-go-lucky. He had a sense of humor and a sweet laugh. And he always enjoyed the kids. But he did everything I wanted to do. I wanted to walk on Waikiki Beach in the moonlight. That sounded very romantic to me. And Grandpa and Grandma walked with us on Waikiki Beach in Honolulu. But Grandpa couldn't bring himself to take his shoes off. So he walked the beach with his shoes on because he knew that was important to me. And he was so sweet, and so anything that I wanted to do, Grandpa said yes to. And we had a fun time. And when we let the hotel where we were staying know that it was their wedding anniversary, and they brought a big fresh fruit, flowers and a fresh fruit platter with pineapple and mangoes and what's the other one besides mangoes?
Coconut.
Well, a coconut, but there's another fruit, I can't remember, but anyhow, they brought all the treasures of Hawaii, and they were so pleased that I don't think anybody had made that much fuss over them in a wedding anniversary all their married life. And it was fun that they did it with us. And we took a little plane trip from the island of Oahu over to the island of the Garden Island.
Maui?
Not Maui, the other one. Anyhow, to one of the other islands, and went on a boat ride, and there were some beautiful things to see there, and we drove all around the island, and it was a wonderful trip for me, and it was a wonderful trip to share with Reed's parents, and it meant a lot to him that he could invite his parents, and he invited his brothers to help pay their way, because we didn't have a lot of money. And of course, I think I went pretty much on the tab of Cal State LA. I'm not sure, but we had to pay Grandma and Grandpa's way. And so Lauren for sure, and I guess maybe Claire pitched in a little bit of money to help us to make that trip for Grandma and Grandpa possible. And it was an experience of a lifetime for them that they never forgot.